A yellow bulldozer smashed through a wooden wall. Boards cracked and flew into the dirt. Dust rolled out in a thick brown cloud. A goat screamed and bolted through the gap, rope trailing behind it. Somewhere inside, metal buckled and crashed to the ground. A small figure ran out from behind the machine, waving both arms. 10 years old, barefoot, screaming at a man twice her size. The driver didn't stop. The blade dropped again, tearing through another wall, boards snapping like matchsticks. She grabbed a fence post and swung it at the tire. It bounced off, and she fell backward into the mud. Her name was Callie Ann Reeves, and this was the only barn her family had left. What she did in the days after made grown men in that county go quiet. Stay with me on this one. The bulldozer pulled back and idled. Diesel smoke hung over the yard. Callie Ann lay in the mud, fence post still in her hands, watching the last wall of the barn fold in on itself. Her father came running from the porch, one boot on and one boot off. He didn't yell at the driver. He didn't yell at anybody. He just stood there, staring at the pile of broken wood like it was a body. That barn had been standing since before Callie Ann was born. Her grandfather built it with his own hands. 3 years back, her father lost his job at the feed mill. 2 years back, her mother got sick and the medical bills started stacking up on the kitchen table like a second mortgage. The bank sent letters. Then it sent men in trucks. Then, this morning, it sent a bulldozer. The barn wasn't much to look at. Leaning boards. A tin roof patched with whatever scrap they could find. But it held the last 3 goats they owned, 40 bales of hay they couldn't afford to lose, and an old tractor that hadn't run in 2 years but still had parts worth something. It was the only thing on that land the bank hadn't already taken. Callie Ann got up and wiped the mud off her face with her sleeve. She looked at the man on the bulldozer. He wasn't from the county. He had a clipboard clipped to the door of the cab and a company logo on his shirt she didn't recognize. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his paperwork. "You can't just knock down a family's barn," she said. Her voice cracked, but she said it anyway. The man glanced down at her like she was a stray dog barking at his tires. "Talk to the bank, sweetheart." Her father put a hand on her shoulder and pulled her back toward the house. He didn't argue. He didn't have the papers to argue with. The notice had come 3 days earlier, taped to the front door. 90 days to pay what they owed, or the bank would take the land itself. The barn coming down early wasn't part of any notice. It was just the company getting a head start, tearing down anything on the property they figured wasn't worth saving. Callie Ann didn't cry. She'd cried plenty already that year. She just stood on the porch steps and watched the machine back away, leaving nothing behind but splinters and a dust cloud settling over what used to be her grandfather's barn. That night, she sat at the kitchen table long after her parents had gone quiet with worry, staring at a stack of bills nobody in that house could pay. She was 10 years old. She had $11 saved in a coffee can, and she had already decided she wasn't done fighting. Morning came gray and quiet. Callie Ann was already outside before her parents woke, walking through what was left of the barn. Splinters everywhere. A twisted piece of tin roofing stuck up out of the mud like a broken tooth. The goats were tied to the porch rail now, shivering, one of them limping from where a board had caught its leg. She picked through the wreckage anyway, looking for anything worth saving. Nails, hinges, a hammer her grandfather used to carry in his back pocket. And that's when she saw it, half buried near the tire tracks. A single sheet of paper, blown loose from somebody's clipboard. She pulled it out of the mud and wiped it clean on her shirt. It was a work order. Company name at the top, a date stamped in the corner, and a line near the bottom that made her stop cold. Scheduled demolition, 60 days out. Not today. Not this morning. 60 days from the date on that paper. Somebody had torn down her family's barn 30 days early, before the notice even ran out, before the bank had any right to touch it. Callie Ann folded the paper twice and shoved it into her coat pocket like it might disappear if she let go of it. She didn't tell her father right away. He was already broken enough, standing out there at dawn staring at the wreckage like it might rebuild itself if he looked long enough. So she carried that paper around all day, through chores, through feeding the goats, through helping her mother fold laundry with hands that still shook from the cold. That evening, after supper, she sat down at the kitchen table with a pencil stub and a torn piece of notebook paper. She wrote slow, the way she'd been taught in school, sounding out the big words under her breath. She wrote to the county newspaper. She told them what happened. She told them about the 60 days. She folded the letter around the work order, sealed it in an envelope she found in her mother's sewing box, and walked it down to the mailbox at the end of the road before anyone could tell her not to. She dropped it in and closed the little metal door. There was no taking it back now. Whatever was going to happen because of that letter, it was already moving, out there past her mailbox, past her fence line, into the hands of people she'd never met. She walked back up the driveway with mud still on her boots and didn't say a word to anyone about where she'd been. The days after that felt almost normal. Her father went into town looking for work. Her mother sat by the window most afternoons, resting, the way the doctor told her to. Callie and fed the goats, mended the fence where the bulldozer had torn through it, and carried water up from the well twice a day because the pipe near the house had frozen solid. Nobody came. No trucks. No men with clipboards. No phone calls. By the end of the week, Callie had almost stopped thinking about the letter at all. She figured it probably got lost somewhere between her mailbox and whoever was supposed to read it. That was usually how things went for families like hers. One evening, she sat on the porch steps with a jar of water, legs stretched out in front of her, watching the sun go down over what was left of the barn. The goats grazed nearby, calm now, the limping one walking easier than it had all week. For the first time in days, her shoulders weren't tight. She took a long drink of water, set the jar down beside her, and closed her eyes for a minute, just listening to the wind move through the broken boards. It felt, for a moment, like maybe the worst of it was over. A car door slammed hard enough to send the goats scattering. Callie Ann's eyes snapped open, and the jar of water tipped over on the porch step. A black car sat in the driveway, engine still running. Not a bank truck. Not the demolition company. A man in a gray suit stepped out, holding a folded newspaper under one arm, and behind him, a second car pulled in right on his bumper. Her father came out onto the porch, wiping his hands on his jeans, confused. The man in the suit didn't wait for an invitation. "Are you the one who sent this?" he said, holding up the newspaper. Callie stood up slow. Her name was printed right there on the front page, next to a photo of the wrecked barn. Local girl exposes early demolition, bank practices questioned. The letter hadn't gotten lost after all. It had landed on the desk of a reporter who smelled a bigger story than one broken barn. Her father took the paper with shaking hands and read it standing in the yard while 3 more cars pulled up along the fence line. A woman got out with a microphone. Another man carried a camera on his shoulder. This wasn't just neighbors anymore. This was the whole county watching. Here's the thing nobody in that house expected. The bank didn't just cut a corner on one farm. That work order Callie pulled out of the mud-mashed work orders from 4 other properties, all torn down early, all before their 90-day notices ran out. The reporter had already made calls. Other families had already come forward. What looked like one broken family getting bulldozed was turning into something the whole county wanted answers about. The man in the suit wasn't from the newspaper at all. He was a lawyer, and he wasn't there to help. He handed Callie Ann's father a folded letter of his own, cold and polite, saying the bank considered the leaked document company property and wanted it back immediately. Her father looked over at Callie without saying a word. She looked right back and shook her head. "No, if you're still with me, this is the part where a lot of people would have folded." A 10-year-old girl, 1 lawyer, 1 bank, 90 days on the clock. But Callie didn't hand over anything. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out the original work order, held it up so the camera could see it clean, and said the 60 days were right there in black ink for anyone to read. If you're finding this story worth your time, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because what happened over the next 2 weeks turned this into something bigger than one barn. The lawyer's face changed. This wasn't a family he could quietly push around anymore. This was now a story with a reporter attached, a camera rolling, and 4 other families whispering the same thing to each other over back fences. What started as one bank crushing one broke family had turned into a county-wide question nobody at that bank wanted asked out loud. Callie didn't know it yet, standing there barefoot in the mud with a wrinkled piece of paper in her hand, but she'd just turned herself into the one witness the bank couldn't afford to have talking. The lawyer folded his letter back up without another word and got in his car. He didn't ask again. He just drove off, gravel popping under his tires, leaving the reporter and the cameraman standing in the yard with Callie Ann's father still holding that newspaper like it might explain itself if he read it twice. 3 days later, the county called a public meeting. Not because the bank wanted one, Because 4 other families had shown up at the newspaper office with their own work orders, their own dates, their own barns and sheds and hog pens torn down early. The reporter had strung it all together into one story, and the story had a headline that made people in 3 towns pick up the paper. Bank demolition company caught skipping notice periods on 5 farms. The meeting was held in the old Grange Hall, the one with the bad heating and the folding chairs nobody liked. Callie sat in the front row between her father and mother, feet not quite touching the floor, still wearing the same coat with the work order tucked inside the pocket, folded so many times now the creases had gone soft. The bank sent 2 men. Suits, ties, the kind of calm faces people practice in a mirror. One of them stood up and read a prepared statement about administrative timing errors and regret for any confusion. No names. No apology that meant anything. That's when Callie stood up. Nobody had planned it. Her father reached for her arm, but she was already moving past him, walking straight up the center aisle in front of a room full of grown adults, holding that folded piece of paper over her head like a flag. "This isn't confusion," she said. Her voice was small, but the room had gone dead quiet, and small was enough. "It says 60 days right here. My daddy's notice said 90. You knocked our barn down on day 60, 30 days before you were even allowed to. And it's not just us." She turned around, facing the other families sitting in the rows behind her. "Ask them," she said. "Ask them what dates on their paper." One by one, hands went up around the room. For other papers, for other dates, all the same story stitched together 5 different ways. The bank's man tried to talk over it, tried to steer things back to his prepared statement, but the room wasn't having it anymore. People were standing up now, some of them shouting, some of them just holding their own papers in the air the way Callie had. The county commissioner sitting at the front table banged a gavel that hadn't been used in years and called for order. But even he was staring at Callie, and like he couldn't quite believe a 10-year-old had just done what 3 lawyers hadn't managed in a week. By the end of that meeting, the bank's men weren't talking about administrative errors anymore. They were on the phone in the hallway, voices low, while the commissioner announced an independent review of every early demolition in the county, starting with the 5 families in that room, starting with a single work order a barefoot girl had pulled out of the mud with her own 2 hands. Callie walked back to her seat and sat down next to her father. He put his arm around her shoulder, and for the first time in weeks, she felt him breathe out slow, like some of the weight had finally shifted off his chest and onto somebody else's. The review didn't take long. Once the county started pulling records, the pattern was too clean to argue with. 5 farms, 5 early demolitions, all from the same company, all working off the same bank contract, all counting on families too tired and too broke to check the paperwork. 2 weeks after the meeting, the bank settled with every family on that list. Callie's father got a check that covered the barn, the tractor parts lost in the wreckage, and enough left over to catch up 3 months of missed payments. It wasn't a fortune. Nobody in that house pretended it was. But it was enough to stop the letters coming, and enough to keep the land under their feet. The company that sent the bulldozer lost its contract with the bank by spring. The state opened its own inquiry not long after, looking into other counties, other early notices, other families who never thought to check a date stamped in the corner of a work order. Callie didn't know most of that part. She was 10. She was more interested in the goats. They rebuilt the barn that summer. Not fancy. Same leaning shape, same tin roof, patched with whatever scrap the neighbors could spare, because half the county showed up on a Saturday with hammers and truck beds full of lumber they didn't really have to give. Her grandfather's hammer went back into her father's back pocket. The limping goat healed up fine and had 2 kids of her own before the year was out. Callie kept the original work order. She didn't need it anymore, not for any bank or any lawyer, but she folded it one more time and put it in an old coffee can on her dresser, the same can where she used to keep her $11. Some things you hang on to just to remember you did them. People in that county still bring it up sometimes. The reporter wrote a follow-up piece months later, just a short one, about how the 5 families were doing. Callie's photo ran again, this time standing in front of the new barn instead of the wreckage of the old one. She wasn't waving her arms at a bulldozer anymore. She was just standing there, barefoot, same as before, holding a bucket of feed like it was any other morning. Her father still tells people, if they ask, that he stood in that yard the day the barn came down and didn't know what to do next. He tells them his daughter did. 10 years old, mud on her face, one piece of paper in her coat pocket, and she wasn't done fighting. Nobody in that county forgot it either. Grown men who'd shaken hands with bank lawyers for 30 years without blinking went quiet whenever her name came up after that. Not because she'd yelled the loudest, because she'd been the only one who bothered to read the fine print, and the only one brave enough to hold it up where everybody could see it. The barn still stands. Leaning a little, same as always. But it stands.